a beautiful, sparkling ring. Even though I was at home, just having it made me feel as though I had wandered into a castle. But that blissful feeling quickly faded. When I tried to put the ring on, it didn't fit at all and got stuck halfway down my finger.
Sorry, did it not fit?
Bob said, looking a bit flustered. It was just a matter of getting the size adjusted later. I shook my head gently and said, "It's fine, don't worry about it." The next day, I headed to the store to request a size adjustment.
Hello, can I help you?
The crisp voice of the store clerk greeted me as I stepped into the store. I walked straight up to the counter and handed over the paper bag. "I'd like to get this resized, please." As soon as the store clerk looked inside the bag, her expression darkened.
Well, actually.
When she whispered what she knew, I was shocked. My eyes widened, and my lips trembled. "My name is Catherine, and I'm 44 years old. I live with my husband, Bob, who is the same age. We met back when we were both in college. We were taking the same class, but the lecture hall was big, and we sat far apart with our respective friends, so we never talked. In fact, we didn't even know each other's names. We were complete strangers. So, what made us start talking? It was during a group project one day. I was sitting with my friends near the back of the lecture hall, but since Bob barely made it in on time that day, he came in through the back door and had to sit close to us, away from his usual group of friends.
All right. Please form groups with the people sitting near you and start the discussion.
At the professor's words, I slowly turned around and made eye contact with Bob. Looking back, that might have been the first time I really took a good look at his face. I remember he had this expression like, "I've never talked to this person before," so I guess it was the same for him.
Okay, I'll be the facilitator.
Even though no one really wanted the role, and everyone looked reluctant, Bob took it on, albeit a little begrudgingly. Seeing that, I thought to myself, he's actually pretty responsible. After that, we somehow started talking more often about class, and before we knew it, we became close enough to have lunch together regularly. By the time we were juniors, Bob confessed his feelings to me.
Well, if it's okay with you, would you go out with me?
He was blushing all the way to his ears. I took his hand without hesitation, but I remember laughing because he used such a polite tone, which he usually didn't with me. After that, we sometimes had our share of arguments, but without any major problems. We continued dating and eventually got married a few years after we both started working. We don't have any children.
Wait, don't you want kids? Why don't you have any?
Well, it's just something between us. Sometimes acquaintances ask me these kinds of questions, but I just brush them off. When we were first married, I used to get annoyed when people kept bringing up kids, thinking they were being nosy, but as I've gotten older, it doesn't bother me as much. Both of us are busy with work, so we don't really have the time or energy to think about children. As long as we're both content with our decision, that's all that matters. Bob and I had been living a happy life, supporting each other like a team. But then one day,
Catherine, here. This is for you.
"What's this?" As soon as Bob got home, he handed me a small paper bag. I was puzzled, tilting my head as I took it, and nervously peeked inside. Inside, there was an elegant box lined with black velvet. What? A surprised sound escaped my lips. Even though I hadn't looked inside the boxlet, I could feel my heart start to race. I glanced over at Bob, and he had a proud look on his face, eagerly waiting for me to open it. With trembling hands, I pulled the box out and slowly opened it. Inside was a sparkling, glittering ring. The diamond set in it gave it an almost divine aura. Even though we were in our own home, just the presence of that ring made me feel like I had wandered into a castle. It was as if the regular LED lights had turned into chandeliers. The ordinary dining table became a grand round table, and the old faded rug had transformed into a red carpet. To me, jewelry always had that kind of romantic power. "Bob, what's with this ring?" I asked, my voice breaking with emotion. Bob, looking a bit embarrassed, scratched his cheek and turned his eyes away as he answered,
Well, it's our anniversary today, right? I figured I'd give you a present since it's a special occasion.
Hearing that, my eyes began to fill with warmth. Even though we'd been together for decades, I still felt a bit embarrassed about crying in front of Bob, so I bit my lip, trying to hold back the tears. There was a reason I was so overwhelmed with emotion. Of course, our wedding anniversary comes around every year, but neither Bob nor I had ever exchanged gifts. At most, we'd look each other in the eye and say a few words of gratitude. Or I'd just prepare his favorite dishes for dinner that night. So, receiving such an extravagant gift like a ring out of the blue stirred my emotions. If you suddenly give me something this expensive, of course I'm going to be shocked.
Well, it's fine, isn't it?
Still in a daze, I said that, and Bob, looking away, responded simply. I imagined him standing alone at a jewelry store, peering into the display case. Was he thinking about what would suit me? Did he ask the store clerk for recommendations on the design? As these thoughts filled my mind, I found myself smiling, and I covered my mouth with my hand to hide it, then asked Bob, "So, can I try it on now?" Without looking at me, he answered gruffly,
Of course. I bought it for you, didn't I?
"He's not going to put it on my ring finger like at our wedding, is he?" I chuckled and started sliding the ring onto my finger myself. Oh. A surprised sound escaped me. The ring didn't fit at all, and got stuck halfway between my first and second knuckles. If I tried to force it any further, it might get stuck and cut off my circulation. Not wanting that to happen, I took the ring off and placed it back in the box. Did Bob misjudge my size? Or, though I don't want to think about it, did he get the same size as my wedding ring, but my fingers have gotten bigger since then?
Sorry, did it not fit?
Bob said, looking a bit flustered. He must have been disappointed that the gift he had put so much thought into didn't work out. It was just a matter of getting the size adjusted later. I shook my head gently and said, "It's fine, don't worry about it. Hey, I can get it resized myself, so could you tell me the name of the store?" When I asked, Bob quickly turned his head away and went silent. He had a look on his face like he was trying to hide something. It was obvious he didn't want to answer, like he was saying, "Don't ask." I frowned, tilting my head in confusion. If I don't know the store, how can I get the size adjusted? Why is he acting so weird about it? Why won't you tell me? I pressed him, but he still didn't say a word. In fact, the more I asked, the worse his mood got, and his expression grew more tense. Eventually, he snapped.
Enough already. I'll take care of it, so just wait, okay?
Why is he getting so mad over a simple question? His sharp, cold voice stunned me, and I just froze, eyes wide open. Of course, I couldn't ask him again. Bob shot me a brief glare before stomping off to his room, slamming the door behind him. The dinner I had worked so hard to prepare sat untouched on the dining table, looking lonely. What the hell? I finally muttered about 5 minutes after he had stormed off. Did I do something wrong? I just asked a normal question. The shock and confusion lingered, and my voice came out in a raspy whisper. In the empty room, my questions just hung in the air, with no one to answer them. Moving slowly, I covered the untouched dinner with plastic wrap and put it in the fridge. I figured I'd eat it tomorrow, and then I went to bed. The next morning, when I woke up, Bob had already left the house. The place was completely silent. I slipped into my slippers and shuffled over to the kitchen, checking the fridge, but it didn't look like he had touched last night's dinner. Since I wasn't really hungry either, I didn't bother preparing breakfast. Instead, I plopped down on the couch in the living room. I picked up the bag with the ring, which I had left on the dining table. Why was Bob so mad? Even after a night's sleep, I still couldn't figure out what had upset him so much. I fought back, wondering if I had done something to bother him, but nothing came to mind. I didn't do anything wrong, I just asked for the store's name, that's all. As I kept thinking about it, I started feeling more and more irritated. I took a deep breath to calm myself down, and as I looked closely at the bag and box, something caught my eye. Wait a minute, this is a store I've been to several times. Last night, I had been so overwhelmed by the surprise of Bob giving me the ring that I hadn't really looked, but the brand name on the bag was from a store I knew well. Well, I can just go there myself then. I stood up, got dressed, put on my makeup, and decided to go to the store that very day to get the ring resized.
Hello. Can I help you?
The crisp voice of the store clerk greeted me as I stepped into the store. I walked straight up to the counter and handed over the paper bag. I'd like to get this resized, please. The store clerk had helped me before and seemed to remember me.
Catherine. Of course, I'll take care of it.
She smiled brightly as she tucked the bag. As soon as she looked inside the bag, her expression darkened. Her sudden change in demeanor startled me, and I leaned in. "Is something wrong?" My voice cracked from nervousness, but she didn't even crack a smile. Her face remained serious and clouded with concern.
Well, actually,
When she whispered watching you, I was shocked. My eyes widened, and my lips trembled. Apparently, a few days ago, Bob had come to the store with another woman to buy the ring. The two of them were walking arm in arm, leaning close to each other, and looked extremely intimate. No, that can't be. The idea that Bob had betrayed me was unbearable, and the room seemed to spin. My lips, hands, and feet started trembling, and I felt like I might collapse if I didn't hold myself together. But remembering that I was in a store, I somehow managed to stay on my feet. I stood there, blinking, trying to recall Bob's behavior over the past few weeks. Now that I thought about it, he had been coming home late more often, claiming work had gotten busier. He'd started working weekends, eating dinner out without telling me. The shock of him giving me the ring had almost made me forget, but the signs were there. And when I had asked about the store, his angry reaction, it must have been because he was scared I'd find out he had been there with someone else.
Catherine.
The store clerk's voice brought me back to reality, noticing my silence. As the shock and sadness of Bob's betrayal washed over me, I felt a wave of anger begin to build. I made sure not to show it on my face since I was in public, but inside, the flames of anger were burning fiercely. The thought of how I couldn't forgive him kept swirling in my mind. To avoid showing it, I bit my lower lip and clenched my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. "Thank you for telling me." I thanked the store clerk, but inside, I was already planning my revenge. First, I need solid proof of his affair so I can make this work in my favor. Fueled by anger, my body moved with surprising efficiency. My mind was razor sharp, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. I hired a private investigator to look into Bob's activities and get detailed information about his behavior. The investigation revealed that the woman he had been seeing was a colleague who had joined his company just last year. I never thought he'd cheat with someone from work. Her name was Jessica, and she was more than a decade younger than us, in her early 20s. The age gap was so wide that they could almost be parent and child. The fact that Bob had gotten involved with someone so young made my skin crawl. What kind of person has such little sense of morality? Disgusting. When I realized her age, I unconsciously muttered those words. My voice was so low that it didn't even sound like mine. The envelope containing the investigation results was full of evidence, including photos of Bob and Jessica on dates. As I stared at the photos, I found myself letting out deep sighs over and over, without even realizing it. Bob, fawning over a young woman, with a foolish grin on his face. His arm eagerly wrapped around her waist, filled with excitement. his finger pointing toward a towering hotel in the bustling nightlife district, as if to say, "Let's hurry." Disgusting. The word escaped my mouth again, unbidden. This time, my voice was colder and lower than I had ever heard it before. The investigation also revealed that the ring Bob had given me on our anniversary had originally been intended for Jessica, but she didn't want it, so he passed it on to me. In short, he had done something incomprehensible, handing down a gift meant for his mistress to his wife. Looking back on that moment, it wasn't because he was embarrassed that he avoided eye contact. It was because he was worried about his affair being discovered. When the ring didn't fit, he panicked, fearing I'd realize it had been sized for another woman's finger. That's why his voice sounded so desperate. So he hadn't been thinking about me at all, had he? A few days later, during dinner with Bob, I finally worked up the courage to speak. "Hey, about the ring." As soon as I started speaking, Bob's hand froze. We were having burgers for dinner. Just as he lifted his burger, I brought up the topic, and the burger slipped from his hand before it reached his mouth. He didn't even seem to care about it at all. He stared at me with a dumbfounded look, his mouth half open. I handed him a tissue, but he didn't take it, and instead said,
Well, like I said, I'll take it in for resizing. I'm just busy with work right now, so wait until my day off. By the way, about work today.
He was trying to change the subject. Of course, he was determined to keep up the act. He could have just admitted what he did and come clean. The fact that he was trying so hard to cover it up meant he knew just how wrong what he had done was. Not that I expected him to confess to the affair anyway. I sighed softly and stood up, walking to my room to grab the paper bag with the ring. I came back, opened the box in front of Bob, and, with a flourish, slid the ring onto my ring finger.
What? Didn't it not fit you?
Bob started to panic. He reached out, as if to stop me. His reaction was so pathetic that I couldn't help but laugh faintly. He didn't seem to understand why I was smiling, and a frown creased his forehead. Contrary to his expectations, the ring fit perfectly this time, sliding onto my finger without any trouble and sparkling beautifully. Even after learning about the affair, a diamond's beauty remains. But what about him? He went after a woman much younger than himself, and when she refused the ring, he pretended it was chosen for me and gave it to me instead. Then, just because I asked about the store, he yelled at me to cover up his affair. It all makes him look incredibly ugly. I actually went to get the ring resized myself. That's when the store clerk told me that you were there with another woman. As I calmly said this, Bob's breath caught in his throat. Realizing that I knew everything, he lowered his eyes in resignation. Even seeing him like that didn't stop me. I kept confronting him with the truth. Her name is Jessica, right? The woman who joined your company last year. At that, Bob shot up from his chair and immediately started apologizing.
I'm sorry. She didn't mean anything to me. Please forgive me.
His voice was slightly muffled, but I heard his apology clearly. Even so, there was no way I could forgive him. He was about to give her a ring, and now he's claiming it was just a fling. That's laughable. I couldn't see my reflection without a mirror, but I was certain that my eyes, filled with disbelief, had turned ice cold. When I snorted, Bob flinched, his shoulders trembling as he kept his head down. He kept begging me not to divorce him, as if he were muttering to himself. "No, I'm not forgiving you. I'm divorcing you." When I cut him off like that, he let out a groan and then started sniffling. But I had already made up my mind, and no amount of crying or pleading would change that. After a few days of packing, I left the house.
Please, don't leave. Don't divorce me.
During that time, Bob apologized and begged me over and over, but I ignored him every single time. I pretended not to hear, not to see him. In my mind, he was already a stranger. The man I once thought was serious and responsible back when we were in college was long gone. When did he become the kind of person who could cheat so easily and then, when faced with being left, desperately beg not to get divorced? It's pathetic. But it didn't matter anymore. From now on, I wouldn't have anything to do with him. Whether he regrets it or reflects on his actions no longer matters to me. My resolve never wavered, and I walked away, leaving Bob behind, crying and pleading. Then, my smartphone started ringing with a call from an unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't answer a call like that, finding it suspicious, but it kept ringing over and over, even when I ignored it. "Who is this? So persistent." Annoyed, I frowned and reluctantly pressed the answer button, putting the phone to my ear. "Hello."
Are you Bob's ex-wife?
The voice on the other end of the line was Jessica's. She explained that she had gotten my number by snooping through Bob's phone. I had imagined her having a shrill voice, but instead, it was oddly low and serious. There was a sense of urgency, as if she couldn't wait to get to the point.
Well, I need you to take Bob back.
I let out a deep sigh at her words. The truth was, Bob didn't turn much, and I had been the one supporting most of our household expenses. If he had shown even a little effort to manage his spending, I might have been able to tolerate it, but he had a serious problem with overspending. Whenever he wanted something, he would buy it without thinking about the consequences, which had eventually led him into debt. Up until now, I had been the one paying off his debts. But now that we were divorced, that was no longer my responsibility. I wasn't going to pay off someone else's debt, so from now on, Bob would have to slowly repay it all on his own. On top of that, he had borrowed a large sum of money from his parents to buy the diamond ring, so he was on the hook for that too. To Jessica, Bob was nothing more than a low-income, debt-ridden burden. That's why she wanted me to take him off her hands.
Please. It's a huge problem for me if he stays with me.
Jessica's voice turned into a shrill cry. Bob was wrong for cheating, but Jessica treating people like disposable objects was just as bad. In a way, they were perfect for each other. Neither of them had a shred of decency. But I had no interest in dealing with Bob anymore either. I refuse. Don't ever contact me again." With that, I hung up without hesitation.
Wait, please.
I pretended not to hear her desperate plea. Afterward, it turned out that Bob was eventually dumped by Jessica too. With no one left to help him, he was left struggling under a mountain of debt and the alimony I had claimed, eventually losing his way. Even when I heard this, not a shred of sympathy stirred in my heart. He had brought it all on himself. As for Jessica, she didn't get off easy either. The whole affair was exposed at work, and she was fired. She's now having a hard time finding another job. When my lawyer told me that, I secretly smiled and muttered to myself, "Serves you right." As for the ring Bob gave me, I've already thrown it away. They say the object itself isn't guilty, but keeping it would only remind me of Bob and Jessica. Instead, I bought myself a new ring as a reward, and I cherish it. The beauty of the gemstones brings light to my heart.